Shalom, welcome to Ancient Manuscripts. This is Rob Van Hoff, and we're looking at the last two Torah portions of our book of Shemot, or Exodus. It's Vayaqhel and Piqudei, two different Torah portions that are pushed together because of the calendar. And it begins with Exodus 35:1 and goes all the way to the end of the book of Exodus. What we're looking at here is a fragment from the Dead Sea Scrolls called 4Q11. And what we're going to learn here is a little bit about Hebrew. This is dated to the Hasmonean era. And what that means is the time of the Maccabees. So it's prior to Roman occupation of the Holy Land. And what we are seeing here is that the Aramaic script is being adopted. The last several fragments we've looked at over the last weeks has been manuscripts written with the Paleo-Hebrew. Here we have Hebrew language written with the Aramaic script, and we're seeing it in a kind of evolution here, a transition rather, and then an evolution of the script. We're going to look at a couple final forms. Here we'll see the Mem Sophite is not yet standardized, so this is before the Roman era. But the verse we're going to be looking at specifically here is Exodus 40, verses 14 and 15. So if I write that on here, you should be able to see Exodus 40, verses 15 and 16. But before we do that, if we look at this manuscript, well, here, let me do this. Let me zoom out. And you'll be able to see, here's the actual fragment, 4Q17. You can see it's not much to look at, and it's most of it's destroyed and smeared. So we're going to be zeroing in just on the places where it's legible. And we're going to be contrasting that with a nice 10th century manuscript of Exodus, which we see right here in the Museum of the Bible website. And what we're going to be looking at specifically is Exodus 40, verse 15 and 16. And it starts right here. It says Ve'et, actually verse 14 starts here. Ve'et banav takriv. Ve'et banav takriv. That means, and his sons you will bring near. So this is the Lord speaking to Moses. And then says, Ve'hilpashta otam kutanot. Kutanot. If you remember, katana is a garment. So it says, you will bring his sons to me, and you will put coats on them. And then our verse that we'll look at in the Dead Sea Scrolls here starts with verse 15. Mashachta otam. Mashachta otam. And you might hear that word mashach. That's that word anoint. And you will anoint them. So the mashachta is, and you will anoint. Mashachta. Otam is them. And you will anoint them, ka'asher mashachta et avihem, just as you anointed their father. So who's their father? Their father is, of course, Aharon. So we hear that mashachta twice. Mashachta otam, you will anoint them, ka'asher mashachta et avihem, just as you anointed their father. And then it continues here and says, Kihanuli, and they will serve me, or they will be priests unto me. V'haita lechiot lahem mashachtam. So mashchatam means their anointing, their mashcha, will be for them likehunat olam ledorotam. It will be for them an eternal kahuna, or priesthood. Ledorotam means throughout their generations. And then just to wrap up, it's verse 16. And then it says, Vaya'as Moshe, and Moshe did, and then we're going to go all the way to the next, top of the next column, Kachol asher tziva Adonai oto ken asa. According to everything that Adonai commanded him, so he did. Okay, so that's what we're zeroing in on. Now remember, the reason we're zeroing in on these particular verses is because these are the verses that we have extant in particular Dead Sea Scrolls. So this is all we have to work with. We don't have an entire Torah scroll of the book of Exodus from Qumran. So we have to just sift through and find fragments that do fall within our Torah portion. And that's what we look at. So what we're looking at here then is this zoomed in bit here of Exodus 40. And I just want to, as we've been doing, I want to point out some of the Hebrew stuff that we learn. That word we looked at, mashachta, I wonder if maybe I can arrange this to where you can see. I'm going to bring this down. There it is. Have them both together. So at the top here it says, u mashachta, u mashachta. Well, that's what we're seeing here. And I'm going to trace it first. Here's our vav, u, our mem, our shin, our chet, and our tav. Umashachta. Now the script here is different than what we see normally. What has emerged later with the standard script looks more like this. Something like that. And you see that it's very different now, because this is an earlier era where Jewish scribes are transitioning from Paleo-Hebrew into what is the standard Aramaic script. So the letters might look a little different than you're expecting. But nevertheless, this is Mashachta, and then we can barely see it here, but there's an Aleph, Vav, another Tav, and then another Mem. Otam. Now in the Masoretic text there's no Vav, it's just Aleph, Tav, Mem, so feet with a Cholim. And so once again we're seeing the scribes use this Vav here to make the O sound. But the later Masoretes don't write that Vav. So you can see why things like Hebrew word pictures or counting letters and things like that are going to be a function of just the scribe that wrote the particular manuscript you're looking at. Here in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they're using the Vav to accidentally reset, to make the O sound. Otam. But there's no difference in meaning. No difference in meaning. Now, one of the things we see here too is that the Mem Sofit does not exist yet. So this is a time, and that's one of the indicators that we're dealing with an earlier time period. Because remember, in Paleo-Hebrew, there is no difference between a Mem Sofit and a regular Mem. Now they'd be used to doing this for their Mem. Remember, we've looked at that in previous episodes. So this last letter here, Otam, this Mem Sofit of Otam, is not technically a Mem Sofit. It's a Mem, and it's at the end of a word, but it is not what we will normally see later in Hebrew writing. Now, you will anoint them. When we zoom out, it's hard to see, that this is what this is. But we can look at other letters that are legible in this fragment, and that helps us locate where we are. Here, right below, we have a lamed, tiny little lamed, a hey, And it does kind of touch there, even though we're not used to seeing that. And then 2 mems. That mem's ugly. Try another one. Another chet. And another tav. And another mem. So what we're seeing here is later in the verse, it says, it will be for them, or their anointing will be for them. And that's what we see here is lahem mashchatam. That's what we're seeing right here. Lahem mashchatam. Their mashcha, their anointing will be for them an eternal priesthood. That's the verse we're looking at. But again, just like we saw with otam here, we see lahem with a word that normally would have a mem sofit. It would be lamed, hey, and then a mem sofit, lahem. But because of the era of Hebrew this is, so remember this is from the time of the Maccabees, this is before Rome comes in to the land, but it's after there's sufficient Aramaic writing script to influence Jewish scribes to transition from Paleo-Hebrew script and to start using the Aramaic script. But in so doing, they have not yet developed the Sophite letters. The last little bit to look and see, if we look at the entire text here again, just for some perspective, you can see that this is not a very legible manuscript. We can see the border here. We can see the right margin, and it just fades away. The last little guy we're going to look at is this right here. And this is our, it doesn't look like it, I know. This is the tetragrammaton. This is Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey. And so we're going to look at it on my zoomed image here that I can write on. So the Yod, funny enough, is like a little arrow. The Hey looks like that. Then the Vav is just a little hook, and then another Hey. So this is not yet, again, remember this is an earlier form of Aramaic script used to write Hebrew. In modern block, you'd say Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey, something like that. Well, not so here. This is it's funny because this reminds me of some of the I don't remember if it's Jerome, one of the later church fathers writes about the name of God, and they actually write it in Greek, and they P, which is letter, we call it pi, but in Greek we say P Yoda, P Yoda, and they say PP because they're reading from left to right, when they see it, rather than right to left, which is the Hebrew. But you could see if you were a Greek speaker, you could see something like this, and you might think that these Heys are in fact the letter pi or P in Greek. So kind of a humorous little tidbit there. But again, this is the tetragrammaton, and this is from that last page, or not the last page, from that last verse, 40 verse 16, where it says, and Moses did kakol asher tziva Adonai oto, just as the Lord had commanded him, so he did. So we know that the book of Exodus finishes with Moshe doing everything that God had commanded, every detail of the Mishkan, from the Ark of the Covenant to the weaving of the curtains to all the sockets and hooks. etc., all the dimensions, all the materials, is accomplished precisely as the Lord had commanded Moshe. And again, so we're looking at a manuscript here which is called 4Q17, and you can look at that on the Dead Sea Scrolls website, deadseascrolls.org.il, I-L for Israel. And this is an infrared photograph, because the leather photograph is way harder to read. So that's why they use different types of photography to try to bring out as much contrast between the ink and the writing surface so that we can make better sense of it. So there you have it. So this is probably, we'd probably say 2nd century BCE is when this was written. We don't know if this was written at Qumran or if this was written elsewhere and then brought to Qumran. It could very well have been brought to Qumran and stored there, except because this was in cave 4, so the 4 here, 4Q, remember, so 4 is cave 4, and then the Q means Qumran. And cave 4 at Qumran was an active cave. So it's a cave. It was a man-made cave. So there was 2 different kinds of caves at Qumran. I guess we can do a little footnote here. There were the caves that are natural caves way up in the limestone cliffs that are hard to get to, and you risk your life getting to them. And then there were the caves that the Qumran inhabitants dug out. They call them the marl caves, that were within walking distance of the community, and it's where they had an active storage. If you think of long-term memory versus like short-term active memory, the documents stored in the hard-to-get-to natural caves were long-term storage, whereas the 4Q, or Cave 4 at Qumran, was one of the few that could have been daily accessible for use of scrolls. And apparently sometimes members of the community could even sleep in those caves. But there's a great variety of manuscripts that are found in 4Q, from real old to newer ones, in all different in languages of Aramaic, Hebrew, and Greek, even in cryptic writing, all different scripts, because it was an active storage place, easily accessible from the actual Qumran community. So this was among those. And so the 17 then, 4Q is cave 4, 17 is just the number as scholars started trying to tag and identify and catalog the different manuscripts. This one was assigned the number 17. So there's nothing special about the number 17 other than just where it is in the order of cataloging. But what we'll see here, is a phase where Jewish scribes are transitioning from Paleo-Hebrew into using an Aramaic script to write Hebrew language texts. Of course, this is Torah. And certain standard things haven't happened yet. And just to repeat, what we see here is like that mem. There's no mem sophit. Sadly, we don't see very many sophit letters. So I can't compare a bunch of different, like a Nun sophit or a Tzadi sophit or anything like that, or a Pei sophit. There's not enough information here for us to get all the things we'd like. But we can see the Yod, He, Vav, He here looks kind of different. And notice the Lamed. Here's a Lamed down here too. Lamed, Het, Dalet, Shin. So the Lameds look a little different. We don't have a Mem Sophit. Notice the Heys don't have a separate leg. Like when we learn Hey today, we think of keep that leg separate. Not so here. It looks very much like a chet if you're not sure what you're looking at. So anyway, hi David, hi Adam, hi LaRue. Hope you guys have had fun. This is fun to do as always, and I can easily rabbit trail. But again, this is a nice example of a 2nd century BC, a fragment of Exodus, end of Exodus, where we can spot little bits of information that help it help locate it inside a larger development of the Hebrew language and the transition from what we call that ancient Hebrew script to an Aramaic script. Hope you guys have fun watching this as much as I have fun making it.